Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. This is Kathy, and today I have a fairly quick card using the Monster Love stamp set from Concord and 9th. This is another card for my 2019 Valentine's Day card series. I started out by stamping that monster onto a piece of Canson watercolor cardstock, and I used VersaFine Onyx black ink because I was planning on doing some watercoloring with my Distress ink pads. The color that I started with is Victorian Velvet, and I did apply some water to the image prior to adding the Distress ink. By adding the water before adding the ink, it actually creates a barrier so the color will stay where I want it to stay. Another way to keep the color where you want it to stay is you can also emboss the image with clear embossing powder. That kind of creates little wells for the color to stay right where you want it to. I was trying to get some shading done, and my lack of patience, because I didn't really let the color dry all the way before adding another layer, I wasn't really getting the depth that I wanted. So I kind of moved on to his little belly, and for that I used spun sugar. And then for his horns I used black soot, and again I did add water into the areas that I wanted the color to go. And I was happy that I did, especially for the horns, because it really faded out that black soot ink. So then the next thing I did was I brought in seedless preserves to try and get some more shading, and the seedless preserves quickly pretty much took over the whole image. But I think that it turned out pretty cute. I really think he's adorable in that purpley color. And I did end up going over his teeth, but that was an easy fix. I just, at the end, I just kind of went over his teeth with a white gel pen. And then to add a little bit more shading to his belly, I added a tiny little bit of the black soot Distress ink. The next thing I did while I set that off to dry was start working on the background, and I cut a stitched scalloped rectangle from the Blueprints 27 die set from My Favorite Things. And I used painter's tape to tape off that stitching so that I could do some ink blending, but I wanted the scallop to stay white. I had die cut a couple of clouds from a Poppy Stamps die set, just so I could have a little cloudy sky, and there I was kind of playing around with the placement to make sure that I didn't have too many clouds, which I ended up having one too many clouds, so I just took one off. Then I started to do some ink blending. I used Mowed Lawn Distress Oxide ink for the grass, and for the sky I used Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink. And I noticed that while I was blending the tumbled glass that it wasn't blending very well. Turns out my poor little ink pad was very dry, because that's one of my very favorite colors and I tend to use it a lot. So I just kept working it and going over it until I got a somewhat decent blend. I was going to stamp on top of that anyway, so it didn't have to be a perfect blend. I started to take off one of the cloud masks, and then I remember, oops, I want to stamp. So I put it back in place before I actually did. I inked up this heart background stamp from Hero Arts, and I used the tumbled glass again just to get the tone-on-tone look, and I placed a piece of scratch paper at the bottom to mask off the grass so I didn't have blue hearts in my green grass. And made sure that I pressed it down really, really well. And I realized that I didn't get my mask down quite far enough, but I have a fix for that too. And then to smooch the hearts a little bit, not totally smear them, but smudge them just a little, I just went over it very lightly with my ink blending tool. Removed the cloud masks and removed the painter's tape, and thought that the grass looked a little flat. So I decided to add in some blades of grass. I started with YG03 and just started randomly doing tiny little flicks to create that look. One thing that I learned while doing this is don't think about it, just do it. I had to not look at what I was doing, otherwise I would start to overthink, and I am the queen of overthink. So I just continued making a bunch of little flicks without thinking about it. Then I moved on to YG17 to do the grass in the forefront, so that's a little trick there. If you want something to look closer, use a darker color, and then for stuff that's further in the background, use a lighter color. After I was done with the YG17, the line was a little bit too separate between the dark and the light, so I went over a few of the darker ones with the YG03. Once I was done with creating the background, I started working on the add-ons for the little monster. I stamped the hands and I colored only one of them with V000 or quadruple zero. And then I had die cut a heart from the coordinating die set and just colored it in with an RV66 marker just to kind of match the monster but not be exact. I did fussy cut the little hand, even though that there are dies that go with it. I fussy cut it because I didn't want that white edge around the little fingers, and then because that image is so tiny, the cuts obviously were not going to be perfectly clean, so I used my brush tip marker to go around the edge. Once I was done with that, it was time to put the card together. I had adhered the fingers to a piece of baker's twine with some glue, and I did let it set off to the side so it had a chance to dry a little bit, and then applied liquid glue to the back of the heart balloon, and then popped that up with foam tape and decided it needed a second layer of foam tape, so I added that, and then just trimmed off the excess baker's twine. And I also had gone over the heart with my Wink of Stella glitter pen. And that finishes up today's card. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back soon with another video. If you like this one, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And we'll see you next time.